5 heavy police officers surrounded a quiet stranger inside an isolated warehouse. They held solid wooden batons, forming a tight circle with no escape. Their goal was simple. They wanted to terrorize the man, take his purebred German shepherd, and steal his money. They expected him to cower. They expected him to beg. But they had absolutely no idea who they had just cornered. The unassuming stranger was an active-duty Navy SEAL. Have you ever seen a trap snap shut on the very people who set it? Let me tell you how the worst cops in town picked a fight with the wrong man. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The heater in the old Ford pickup rattled loudly. It pushed out a weak stream of lukewarm air against the freezing Colorado winter. Larry kept his hand steady on the steering wheel. He was a man built for harsh conditions. At 32, he carried the lean, heavily muscled frame of an active-duty Navy SEAL. His hair was shaved down to a strict military buzz cut. He wore a plain black canvas jacket and faded blue jeans. His face remained completely neutral, carved from years of high-stress environments. His dark eyes constantly scanned the snowy road ahead, registering every detail of the shifting landscape. Sitting in the passenger seat was Max. Max was a purebred German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat. He was not just an ordinary pet. Max was a highly trained military working dog and a veteran of 2 dangerous overseas tours. The dog sat upright. His sharp ears twitched at the sound of the howling wind outside the glass. Max looked at Larry. Larry briefly took his right hand off the wheel and rubbed the thick fur behind the dog's ears. "Almost there, buddy," Larry said. His voice was low and perfectly calm. Max gave a soft whine and rested his head on his paws, keeping his amber eyes fixed on the falling snow. They were driving into Oakhaven. It was a remote town nestled deep in the rugged Colorado mountains. It was not a place people visited for a pleasant vacation. It was a place people ended up when they wanted to be forgotten. The sky above hung low and gray, heavy with a fresh blizzard. The tall pine trees on either side of the 2-lane highway bent under the heavy weight of the ice. Larry did not want to be here. He had requested an emergency leave for one reason only. His father had passed away 5 days ago. The old man suffered a sudden heart attack in the frozen driveway of their isolated cabin. The town lawyer had sent a brief formal email to the base. Larry needed to sign the final estate papers, pack up the remaining personal belongings, and sell the property. It was supposed to be a quick administrative trip. That was the entire plan. However, the timing could not have been worse. Larry and his elite team were currently preparing for a classified Tier 1 deployment. The mission details were highly restricted. Before Larry left the naval base in Virginia, his commanding officer pulled him aside in the hallway. "Get your family business sorted," the commander had said, looking Larry dead in the eye. "But keep your head down. We launch in exactly 3 weeks. Any local trouble, any legal flags, any police reports, and you are grounded. I cannot have my point man stuck in a civilian courtroom. Do you understand?" Larry had nodded. He understood perfectly. A SEAL does not draw unnecessary attention. A SEAL completes the objective and disappears. He just needed to clear out the old house, sign the paperwork, and drive straight back to the base. He had absolutely zero room for error. The rusty pickup truck crossed the town limits. A weathered wooden sign welcomed visitors to Oakhaven. Larry slowed the vehicle down to match the speed limit exactly. The main street looked entirely abandoned. Most of the storefront windows were boarded up with cheap plywood. A single gas station and a small diner showed dim lights through the heavy snowfall. A few locals huddled in thick winter coats outside the diner. They stopped talking and stared as the unfamiliar truck rolled past. Their eyes held a mixture of deep suspicion and quiet hostility. Larry noticed the stares immediately, but he kept his focus strictly forward. He was used to navigating hostile environments. This was just a sleepy mountain town. He navigated the truck through the center of Oakhaven and turned onto County Road 9. This specific route led directly to the outskirts, where his father's cabin sat isolated near the dark tree line. The road was barely plowed. Fresh snow crunched loudly under the worn tires. The isolation of the area felt incredibly heavy. Larry thought about his father. They had not spoken much in the last 3 years. The military demanded all of Larry's time, and the old man preferred his stubborn solitude. Now there was only a cold, empty house waiting for him, filled with dusty boxes and memories he did not want to unpack. The wind picked up, swirling white powder across the cracked asphalt. The visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. Larry leaned forward, squinting through the sweeping windshield wipers. He checked the dashboard clock. It was nearing 5 in the afternoon. The winter darkness was already creeping in, swallowing the edges of the dense forest. Suddenly, Max sat up. The dog gave a low, rumbling growl deep in his chest. His ears pinned straight up, locking onto a sound behind them. Larry glanced at the dog, then immediately checked his mirrors. A pair of bright headlights materialized from the swirling snow behind them. The lights were moving fast, much faster than the dangerous icy conditions allowed. Larry tapped his brakes slightly to test his tire traction. The vehicle behind him did not slow down at all. It closed the distance aggressively. Larry kept his speed steady. He checked the speedometer. He was going exactly 25 miles per hour in a 30 zone. He was doing everything by the book. The headlights surged closer until they were barely a car length away from his rear bumper. Then the driver hit the high beams. The blinding white light flooded the cab of Larry's truck. The intense glare reflected off the rearview mirror, piercing Larry's eyes and illuminating the entire interior. Max barked once, a sharp warning sound. "Easy, Max. Hold," Larry commanded quietly. The dog instantly stopped barking, but his strong muscles remained tense, ready to spring into action. Larry adjusted the rearview mirror to deflect the blinding light. He squinted into the side mirror to identify the vehicle. Through the driving snow and the intense glare, he made out the distinct outline of a heavy-duty SUV. On the roof, a bulky light bar sat dark and dormant. There were faint reflective decals on the front grille. It was a local police cruiser. The cruiser did not turn on its sirens. It did not flash its red and blue emergency lights. It simply rode Larry's bumper, the bright shining relentlessly into his mirrors. It was a deliberate act of intimidation, a silent threat executed on an empty, snow-covered road. Larry felt the familiar rush of adrenaline in his bloodstream. It was the exact same chemical spike he felt right before a tactical door breach, but his rigorous training kicked in immediately. His heart rate stayed perfectly steady. He breathed in slowly through his nose, out smoothly through his mouth. He remembered his commander's strict warning. No trouble, no legal flags. He gripped the steering wheel tight, his knuckles turning white under the pressure. He kept the truck moving at exactly 25 miles per hour. He refused to speed up. He refused to give them a single reason to pull him over. The cold return home had just turned into a highly dangerous game. The red and blue lights finally erupted in the rearview mirror. They painted the falling snow in harsh, flashing colors. Larry did not hit the brakes suddenly. He eased his foot off the accelerator. He guided the heavy, rusted Ford pickup to the side of the icy road. The tires crunched loudly over the thick snowbank. He placed the truck in park and turned off the engine. The heavy silence of the mountain town immediately pressed against the thin glass windows. Officer Briggs stepped out of the police cruiser. Briggs was a heavy-set man in his late 30s. He wore a thick winter uniform that looked slightly too tight around his waist. A heavy-duty flashlight rested securely in his left hand. His right hand rested casually near his service weapon. He walked with a slow, arrogant swagger. He took his time walking up to the driver's side window, letting the snow pile up on his dark shoulders. Larry rolled the window down. A sudden blast of freezing air hit his face. "License and registration," Briggs said. He did not offer a greeting. He immediately shined the bright beam of the flashlight directly into Larry's eyes. Larry squinted slightly, but his facial expression did not change at all. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Your left turn signal is out," Briggs lied smoothly. He moved the beam of light around the dark interior of the truck cab. "You are creating a dangerous hazard on my roads." Larry knew the truck perfectly. He had personally checked every single light and fluid level before leaving the naval base. He chose not to argue. Arguing with a corrupt cop on an empty, dark road was a serious tactical error. He slowly reached into his canvas jacket pocket. He pulled out a plain brown leather wallet. He extracted his standard Virginia driver license. He deliberately left his military identification hidden deep inside the folds of the wallet. He handed the plastic card to Briggs, along with the vehicle registration from the glove compartment. Briggs snatched the documents. He looked at the Virginia address. He sneered. "Virginia? You're a long way from home, boy. What brings you out to Oak Haven in the middle of a massive blizzard driving a piece of junk like this?" "Family business," Larry answered. His voice was perfectly flat and controlled. "My father passed away last week. I am here to pack up his house and settle the estate." Briggs leaned closer to the window. He smelled strongly of stale coffee and cheap tobacco. He finally noticed the large German shepherd sitting motionless in the passenger seat. Max stared directly at the officer. A low, vibrating growl started deep within the dog's chest. It was a clear warning sound. Larry moved his right hand slightly. He tapped his index finger against his own thigh twice. Max instantly stopped growling. The dog remained completely tense, but he obeyed the silent command perfectly. Briggs laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound. "You better keep that wild animal under strict control. We do not tolerate vicious mutts in this county. Animal control will put him down before you can blink." Larry gripped the steering wheel tightly. He felt a sharp spike of anger. He forced it down immediately. "He is under control." "Stay right here," Briggs commanded. He turned around and walked back to his running cruiser. Larry rolled the window up halfway to keep the swirling snow out of the cab. He focused intently on his breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. It was a basic combat breathing technique used by special operators to lower their heart rate. He thought about his team back in Virginia. He thought about the upcoming classified deployment. He could not afford a physical altercation tonight. He needed to absorb this insult and move on quietly. 10 agonizing minutes passed. The snow continued to fall heavily, rapidly burying the windshield in white powder. Then a second set of headlights pierced the darkness. Another vehicle pulled up directly behind the police cruiser. It was a large black SUV with heavily tinted windows. The doors opened. 2 men stepped out into the storm. One was Briggs. The other man was clearly the one in charge. Police Chief Harris walked slowly toward Larry's truck. Harris was an older man, perhaps in his late 50s. He had sharp, calculating eyes and silver hair neatly trimmed under his winter hat. He moved with the quiet confidence of a predator who owned the entire forest. He wore a heavy wool coat over his pressed uniform. The polished brass stars on his collar caught the dim light from the cruiser. Harris stopped right by the window. Briggs stood closely behind him, smirking openly. Larry rolled the window all the way down again. Harris did not use the flashlight. He simply stared at Larry for a long, silent moment. He evaluated the lean muscles hidden under the jacket, the strict military haircut, the completely calm demeanor. Harris knew how to read dangerous people. He realized the man sitting in the truck was not an ordinary civilian. But Harris also felt completely untouchable in his own isolated town. "Welcome to Oak Haven," Harris said quietly. His voice was smooth but laced with obvious venom. He handed Larry a folded piece of yellow paper. "Officer Briggs wrote you a citation for the broken signal. He also noticed your tires do not meet the strict county winter safety standards. That is another major violation." Larry took the paper. He unfolded it carefully. The total fine was outrageous. It was nearly $500 for entirely fabricated offenses. "You have exactly 48 hours to pay this fine in cash at the station," Harris continued. He leaned closer, resting his heavy-gloved hands on the window frame. "We have a very specific way of doing things in this town, Larry. We strongly value our peace and quiet. Strangers who come here and refuse to respect our rules usually find the winter very unforgiving. Sometimes their old cars break down on mountain roads. Sometimes they get lost in the dark woods. Sometimes they lose their highly valuable property. Harris shifted his cold gaze directly to Max. The threat was not veiled anymore. It was direct and aggressive. Larry looked back at the chief. He did not blink. He memorized every line on the face of the man threatening him. "I understand perfectly." "Good," Harris smiled thinly. "Have a safe drive to your father's cabin. The roads are quite dangerous tonight." Harris tapped the icy roof of the truck twice. He turned and walked back to his dark SUV. Briggs followed him, laughing quietly into the wind. Larry watched in the rearview mirror as the two police vehicles turned around and drove back toward the town center. The bright red and blue lights slowly disappeared into the thick blizzard. Larry sat alone in the dark, freezing truck. He folded the heavy citation neatly and placed it deep in his pocket. He turned the key. The cold engine sputtered and then roared back to life. He put the truck in gear and slowly pulled back onto the snowy mountain road. He had officially received his greeting from the local authorities. The real test of his discipline had just begun. The morning sun offered no real warmth. It hung pale and distant over the snow-covered peaks. Larry stood on the wooden porch of his father's cabin. He watched his breath form white clouds in the freezing air. Max sat beside him. The dog remained alert and quiet. He watched the dark tree line intently. Larry went back inside the cabin. The small house felt completely empty. Thick dust covered the old wooden furniture. He fed Max a precise portion of high-protein kibble from his travel supply. He packed a small green duffel bag with essential items. He needed to visit the town lawyer, grab basic groceries, and get back to packing up the house. The plan remained simple and strict. He would not let the local police provoke him. He had a mission waiting for him in Virginia. He drove the old Ford back into Oak Haven. Daylight revealed the true sad state of the mountain town. Many storefront windows sat completely empty behind dirty glass. The few operational businesses looked worn down by the harsh winters and a severe lack of visitors. Larry parked his truck directly in front of a small brick building. A faded gold sign in the window read, "Finney Legal Services." Larry pushed the heavy glass door open. A small brass bell chimed above his head. Behind a cluttered wooden desk sat Mr. Finney. Finney was an older, fragile-looking man with thinning gray hair. He wore a wrinkled brown suit that hung loosely on his narrow shoulders. He looked up nervously as Larry entered the room. "You must be Larry," Finney said. He stood up slowly and extended a shaking hand. "I am truly sorry for your loss. Your father was a quiet man, but he was a good neighbor." Larry shook the man's hand firmly. "Thank you. I want to finalize the property paperwork today." Finney gestured to a worn wooden chair. He gathered a thick stack of printed documents from his desk. "Everything is ready. The property deed transfer, the bank account closures. You just need to sign on the bottom lines." Larry sat down. He read through the legal papers quickly but thoroughly. His eyes caught a slight, constant tremor in Finney's hands. The lawyer kept glancing past Larry, looking out the front window toward the empty street. "Is something wrong?" Larry asked. His voice remained perfectly steady. Finney hesitated. He looked down at his cluttered desk. "I saw Chief Harris stop you on the road last night. Word travels very fast in Oak Haven. People always watch the roads." "He gave me a citation for a broken signal," Larry said calmly. "The signal works perfectly fine." Finney sighed heavily. He rubbed his tired eyes behind his thick glasses. "Just pay it. Do not argue with him. Harris runs this entire town like his own private kingdom. The town council answers directly to him. The local judge plays golf with him every Sunday. If you fight the ticket, he will find 10 more reasons to make your life miserable." People who push back against Harris usually lose a lot more than just their money. Larry signed the last document. He placed the black pen back on the desk. I am leaving in exactly 3 days. I just need to finish clearing out the old house." "Keep your head down," Finney whispered softly. "Just pay the fine and leave quickly." Larry thanked the lawyer. He stepped back out into the biting winter cold. He needed supplies. He walked 2 blocks down the icy sidewalk to the only grocery store in town. Max walked perfectly at his left heel. They entered the small store. The cashier, a young woman, stopped scanning items immediately. She stared at Larry and then quickly looked away in obvious fear. Larry bought black coffee, fresh bread, and some canned soup. He paid the cashier in cash. He walked out holding the small plastic bag. He headed back toward his parked truck. As he approached the vehicle, he saw Officer Briggs. Briggs stood next to the driver's side door. He was writing furiously on a thick yellow pad. Larry stopped walking. He looked critically at his truck. It was parked perfectly within the faded white lines on the street. The tires rested exactly 3 inches from the snow-covered curb. "Is there a problem, officer?" Larry asked. He kept his tone completely neutral. Briggs ripped the yellow paper from his pad. He smiled a crooked, arrogant smile. "You are parked illegally. Your rear tire is obstructing the flow of traffic." It was a blatant, ridiculous lie. The road was wide and completely empty of cars. Briggs shoved the new citation against the cold glass of the windshield. He trapped the paper under the heavy wiper blade. "That is another $200. You are racking up quite a heavy bill, soldier." Larry did not look at the ticket. He looked directly at Briggs. He calculated the total cost in his head. The fine from last night plus this new citation equaled $700. It was a significant amount of money, but he thought about his elite team waiting at the base. He thought about the classified deployment orders. A physical fight here meant a police report. A police report meant his commander would ground him immediately. The mission was vastly more important than his pride. "I will take care of it," Larry said flatly. He stepped forward to unlock the truck door. "Hold on," a deep voice called out. Chief Harris stepped out from the narrow alley beside the legal office. He walked slowly toward Larry. His heavy boots crunched loudly on the thick ice. Harris stopped a few feet away. He ignored Larry entirely and focused his sharp eyes directly on Max. Max sat perfectly still on the pavement. The dog did not growl, but his strong muscles locked tight, preparing for action. "That is a very impressive animal," Harris said smoothly. "Purebred, highly trained. He looks exactly like a military working dog." Larry placed his bare hand near Max's head. "He is my dog," Harris smiled coldly. "You have a lot of unpaid fines mounting up rapidly, Larry. $700 is a steep price for a man driving a rusty old truck. I worry you might not have the cash on hand to settle your legal debts with the town." "I will pay the fines," Larry repeated. Harris stepped closer. He invaded Larry's personal space deliberately. "In Oakhaven, we take unpaid debts very seriously. If a visitor cannot pay his citations within the 48-hour window, we have the legal authority to confiscate personal property to cover the cost." Harris looked down at Max again. The threat hung heavy and dark in the freezing air. "A highly trained German shepherd would fetch a very high price at a specialized private auction," Harris whispered. "Or maybe we just put him in the county pound. They get very overcrowded this time of year. Sometimes they have to put the aggressive ones down." Larry felt a cold fire ignite deep in his chest. His heart rate spiked instantly. His right hand twitched slightly by his side. He imagined grabbing Harris by the heavy wool coat. He imagined driving the man hard into the frozen pavement. He knew exactly how to end the threat in 3 seconds. But he forced his hand to stay open. He forced his breathing to slow down. He could not lose his military career over a small-town tyrant. He had to protect his dog the smart way. "I will bring the cash tomorrow," Larry said. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "Tomorrow afternoon," Harris agreed cheerfully. "Do not be late. It would be a real shame to lose such a beautiful dog." Harris turned around and walked away down the street. Briggs laughed openly and followed his boss. Larry stood alone in the snow. He took the yellow ticket from the windshield. He crushed it tight in his fist. He opened the passenger door for Max. The dog jumped in immediately. Larry got into the driver's seat. He gripped the steering wheel so hard the cold plastic creaked. The game of extortion was escalating quickly. The corrupt cops wanted to break him. They wanted to see him snap and make a mistake. Larry stared through the windshield at the empty road. He would play their game for one more day, but every man had a strict limit. Larry steered the old Ford pickup up the winding dirt path leading to his father's cabin. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a thick, pristine white blanket over the surrounding woods. He parked the truck near the front porch. He immediately noticed something wrong. The front door stood wide open. The wooden frame around the lock was completely splintered. Larry turned the engine off. He did not rush out. He scanned the perimeter of the property. There were fresh tire tracks in the driveway. The tracks belonged to heavy-duty vehicles, not a standard civilian car. There were large boot prints leading up the wooden stairs and into the house. "Stay," Larry commanded Max quietly. The dog remained perfectly still in the passenger seat. Larry stepped out of the truck. He moved silently up the steps. He kept his body low and balanced. He peered around the broken doorframe. The cabin was completely trashed. He signaled Max to follow. The dog jumped out and joined him at the door, sniffing the air intensely. The scent of unfamiliar men lingered heavily in the cold room. Larry walked into the living room. The intruders had torn the place apart. The cushions on the old sofa were slashed open. White foam stuffing scattered across the floor like fresh snow. His father's wooden bookshelf lay on its side. Dozens of hardcover books were ripped and thrown against the far wall. The kitchen cabinets stood open. Broken plates and glass cups littered the linoleum floor. It was not a robbery. The small television remained mounted on the wall. A silver watch sat untouched on the side table. This was a deliberate message. It was an act of pure intimidation. Harris and his men had visited the property while Larry was buying groceries in town. They called it a security check. They meant it as a display of absolute power. Max growled low, smelling the recent presence of strangers. "Quiet," Larry said. His voice sounded hollow in the wrecked cabin. Larry stood in the center of the destruction. He looked at a framed photograph lying face down amid the broken glass. He picked it up carefully. The glass was shattered, but the picture remained intact. It showed Larry as a young boy standing next to his father on a fishing trip. Larry wiped a speck of dirt from his father's face. He felt the anger rising again. It was a hot, blinding wave of rage. These corrupt cops had violated his family home. They had disrespected a dead man. The urge to hunt them down right now pulsed strongly in his veins. He knew their patrol routes. He knew how to isolate them, one by one. He closed his eyes. He focused on his breathing. He pictured his commanding officer at the naval base. He pictured his SEAL team loading gear for the upcoming classified deployment. He could not throw his entire career away for revenge in a small mountain town. He had to absorb this strike. Larry put the photograph down gently. He found an intact trash bag under the kitchen sink. He began to clean. He moved methodically. He swept up the broken glass. He righted the heavy bookshelf and placed the torn books back on the shelves. He gathered the ruined sofa cushions and piled them in a corner. He worked for 2 hours without stopping. He let the physical labor channel his frustration. He did not speak a single word. He just worked until the cabin looked somewhat normal again, but the adrenaline still burned hot in his system. He needed to burn it out completely before he made a fatal mistake. "Let us go for a run, Max," Larry said. He opened the back door. The rear of the property led directly into a dense, snow-covered pine forest. Larry did not wear a heavy winter coat. He wore only a gray, long-sleeve shirt and his faded jeans. He needed the biting cold to shock his system. He started jogging into the trees. Max ran effortlessly by his side. The deep snow made every step incredibly difficult. It provided the exact resistance Larry needed. He pushed his pace faster. The freezing air burned his lungs. The sharp pine branches whipped against his arms, leaving thin red scratches. He ignored the pain. He focused entirely on the physical exertion. They ran for 5 miles deep into the wilderness. Larry ran until his muscles ached and his mind finally cleared. He found his center again. He was a Tier 1 operator. He did not react to cheap provocation. He solved problems strategically. He turned around and began the grueling run back toward the cabin. The sun began to set as they approached the edge of the property line. The shadows grew long and dark across the white ground. Larry slowed his pace to a walk, catching his breath. Max trotted slightly ahead, his ears swiveling constantly. Suddenly, Max stopped. He planted his paws firmly in the snow and let out a deep, warning bark. Larry stopped immediately. He looked through the thinning trees ahead. 3 figures stood near the back porch of the cabin. It was Officer Briggs and 2 other heavily built deputies. They wore their dark winter uniforms. They stood with their hands resting casually near their utility belts. They were waiting for him. Larry walked slowly toward them. He did not show any signs of fatigue from his run. He stood tall and perfectly straight. Max walked close to his left leg, growling continuously now. "You have a nice piece of property here," Briggs said loudly as Larry approached. "It would be a shame if it caught fire during the winter. Old wiring is very dangerous." Larry stopped 10 feet away from the 3 men. He looked at Briggs. He looked at the 2 deputies. He calculated their weight, their stance, and their weapon placements. "What do you want?" Larry asked. Briggs stepped forward. His smile disappeared. "Chief Harris sent us to deliver a final message. He feels you are not taking your legal debts seriously. He thinks you might try to skip town tonight." "I said I would bring the money tomorrow," Larry replied. "You will bring every single dollar to the station by noon tomorrow," Briggs demanded. He pointed a thick finger directly at Max. "If you do not show up by 12 o'clock, we will issue a warrant for your arrest. And Animal Control will seize that vicious dog immediately. The pound is running a special protocol this month. Any undocumented dog suspected of carrying rabies gets euthanized on site. No holding period, no appeals." The 2 deputies behind Briggs smirked. They stepped slightly apart, trying to surround Larry in a loose half-circle. The threat was absolute. Pay the extortion money or the dog dies. Larry looked down at Max. The dog looked up at him, completely loyal and ready to fight on command. Larry felt his right hand curl into a tight fist. His knuckles popped loudly in the cold air. The 3 cops tensed up, expecting a fight. They wanted him to throw the first punch so they could justify shooting him. Larry stared at Briggs. He held the man's gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, very slowly, Larry opened his right hand. He let his fingers relax entirely. "Noon tomorrow," Larry said quietly. "I will bring the cash." Briggs laughed. It was a cruel, satisfied sound. "Good boy. See you tomorrow, soldier." The 3 officers turned and walked away toward the front of the house, their boots crunching loudly in the snow. The morning sky hung heavy with thick gray clouds. The freezing temperature turned the previous day's snow into solid ice. Larry woke up early. He packed his remaining gear into the green duffel bag. He fed Max another precise portion of kibble. The dog ate quickly and sat by the door. Larry checked his watch. It was 9 o'clock. He had exactly 3 hours before the noon deadline. He drove the truck into town. He stopped at the small local bank. He walked up to the teller window and requested a cash withdrawal. He pulled exactly $700 from his account. He placed the crisp $100 bills into a plain white envelope. He folded the envelope and slid it deep into his jacket pocket. He walked back out to the truck. He climbed inside. He drove straight to the Oak Haven police station. The police station sat at the end of Main Street. It was a square brick building with narrow windows. Larry parked in the visitor lot. He left the engine running to keep the heater on for Max. "Stay here," Larry commanded. Max laid his head on the passenger seat. Larry walked into the station. The lobby felt cramped and smelled heavily of bleach. A thick sheet of scratched bulletproof glass separated the lobby from the main office. Behind the glass sat Desk Sergeant Miller. Miller was a thin, nervous man in his early 40s. He had a patchy brown beard and wore a wrinkled uniform shirt. He looked up from a stack of paperwork as Larry approached the small sliding window. "I am here to pay my citations," Larry said clearly. He placed his 2 yellow tickets on the metal counter. Miller looked at the tickets. He looked at Larry. His eyes darted nervously toward the back hallway. Chief Harris left specific instructions regarding these citations. "I have the cash right here," Larry said. He tapped his jacket pocket. "Take the money and clear the tickets." Miller shook his head quickly. "I cannot process these. Chief Harris took your file. He said you need to deliver the payment directly to him. He is currently conducting an inventory check at the county impound warehouse." Larry stared at the nervous desk sergeant. The setup was incredibly obvious. The police chief wanted to move the transaction away from the public station. He wanted to isolate Larry. "Where is the warehouse?" Larry asked. "It is 3 miles south of town on Route 12, Miller answered. He pushed the yellow tickets back through the slot. "Take the dirt access road right after the old bridge. You cannot miss it." Larry took his tickets. He turned around and walked out of the station. He got back into his truck. He put the vehicle in gear and drove south. Route 12 was completely deserted. Tall pine trees lined both sides of the narrow asphalt. Larry crossed the old metal bridge. He saw the dirt access road. He turned the steering wheel. The truck bounced over deep, frozen ruts. He drove for another half-mile into the thick forest. The trees suddenly cleared. A large, rusted metal building sat alone in a wide dirt lot. A tall chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter. Larry parked the truck near the front entrance. He turned off the engine. He sat in the quiet cab for 2 full minutes. He scanned the entire area. He looked at the roof of the warehouse. He looked at the tall wooden utility poles. He checked the corners of the metal building. There were 0 security cameras. There were no civilian vehicles in the lot. Only Chief Harris's black SUV and 2 dark police cruisers sat parked near the side loading dock. This was a classic ambush site. It offered total isolation and 0 witnesses. Larry knew exactly what awaited him inside. He had faced heavily armed insurgents in hostile cities. A group of corrupt small-town cops did not intimidate him, but he needed to control the situation perfectly. He needed to protect his career and his dog. He opened his door and stepped out onto the frozen dirt. He opened the passenger door. Max jumped down. "Heel!" Larry commanded. Max pressed his shoulder against Larry's left leg. They walked together toward the heavy metal door at the front of the building. Larry pulled the heavy steel handle. The door groaned loudly on rusted hinges. Larry stepped inside. The warehouse interior was massive and freezing cold. The air smelled strongly of old motor oil, damp cardboard, and raw gasoline. Fluorescent lights buzzed loudly near the high metal ceiling. Several confiscated cars sat covered in thick dust across the concrete floor. In the center of the open space stood 5 men. Chief Harris stood in the front. He wore his heavy wool coat. He smiled a wide, confident smile. Officer Briggs stood to his right, resting his hand on his utility belt. The 2 deputies from the cabin incident stood on the left. Behind them stood a new officer. Deputy Carter was a towering man, standing well over 6 feet tall. He had a shaved head and thick, heavily tattooed arms stretching the sleeves of his uniform shirt. Carter cracked his knuckles loudly. All 5 men watched Larry and Max walk into the center of the room. Larry stopped 10 feet away from the group. He kept his posture perfectly relaxed. Max sat down right next to Larry's boot. The dog stared intently at the 5 men. "You made it," Harris said smoothly. His voice echoed off the metal walls. "I appreciate a man who respects a strict deadline." "I brought the money," Larry said. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the white envelope. He extended his hand forward. Harris stepped forward. He took the envelope from Larry. He opened the flap and looked at the crisp $100 bills. He pulled the money out and counted it slowly. He nodded his head in fake approval. Then Harris opened his hand. He let the $700 fall directly onto the dirty concrete floor. The bills scattered across a dark oil stain. "We have a problem," Harris said. His smile vanished. His eyes turned cold and hard. "The fine was $700 yesterday, but you made us wait. You made my officers drive all the way out to your father's cabin to check on you. That incurs an additional administrative fee. The price went up." "How much?" Larry asked evenly. Harris looked down at the German shepherd. "The price is the dog. We are taking the animal. You are going to walk out of here, get in your rusty truck, and leave Oak Haven forever." "I am not leaving my dog," Larry stated. Harris sighed heavily. He took 2 steps back. He looked at his 4 officers. He gave them a slow, deliberate nod. Briggs, Carter, and the 2 deputies simultaneously reached for their utility belts. They did not pull their firearms. They pulled out heavy, solid wooden batons. The dark wood gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. They spread out quickly, forming a tight circle around Larry and Max. They cut off the exit. They blocked every path to the door. "We tried to do this the easy way," Harris said from outside the circle. "Now we are going to teach you how we handle disrespectful strangers in this county. Take the dog. Break the man." The 4 heavy cops raised their wooden batons. They stepped forward in unison, closing the tight circle. Larry did not back away. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the 4 armed men surrounding him. He let the cold, calculated combat logic take over his brain. The extortion game was officially over. The physical fight had arrived. The heavy metal warehouse door remained tightly closed behind Larry. The vast interior of the building felt like a giant icebox. The air was thick with the smell of old motor oil and raw fear. The 4 heavy cops closed their circle. They held their solid wooden batons tightly. They stepped forward in complete unison. They expected the stranger to beg. They expected him to surrender his dog and his money. They fundamentally misunderstood the man standing in front of them. Larry did not back away. He did not flinch. He assessed the geometry of the impending violence. He noted the exact distance between himself and each attacker. He measured their shifting body weight. He recognized their complete lack of formal tactical training. They were simply large bullies used to terrifying unarmed civilians. "Stay," Larry commanded Max. His voice was incredibly calm. Max immediately dropped his hindquarters to the freezing concrete. The German shepherd sat perfectly still. He did not growl, his ears pinned straight back, his amber eyes locked onto the men threatening his handler. He trusted Larry entirely. Officer Briggs lost his patience first. He wanted the glory of landing the first blow. He lunged forward with a loud grunt. He swung his heavy wooden baton in a wide, vicious arc aimed directly at Larry's left temple. It was a brutal strike meant to cause severe trauma. But to a Tier 1 operator, the movement was incredibly slow and entirely predictable. Larry did not try to block the heavy wood. He simply shifted his weight to his right leg. He moved his head back exactly 2 inches. The baton sliced through the empty cold air, missing his face by a fraction of a second. Briggs stumbled forward, his momentum pulling him completely off balance. Larry stepped inside the officer's guard. He drove his open right palm violently upward into Briggs' chin. The impact snapped Briggs's head back sharply. Before the man could fall, Larry delivered a precise secondary strike to the brachial plexus nerve on the side of Briggs's thick neck. Briggs's eyes rolled back immediately. His legs turned to jelly. He collapsed heavily onto the concrete floor like a dropped sack of cement. The wooden baton clattered loudly into the dark corners of the room. 1 down. Exactly 4 seconds had passed. Deputy Carter roared in sudden anger. The massive, tattooed man charged forward like a wild bull. He abandoned any attempt at strategy. He raised his baton high above his head, intending to crush Larry's collarbone with sheer brute force. Larry pivoted smoothly on the ball of his left foot. He did not meet the massive force directly. He guided Carter's heavy momentum right past him. As the giant man rushed by, Larry delivered a devastating, focused low kick directly to the side of Carter's knee joint. A sickening pop echoed loudly across the open warehouse. Carter screamed in sudden agony. His massive leg buckled instantly. He hit the oily ground hard, dropping his weapon and clutching his ruined knee with both hands. He rolled in the dirt, completely disabled and weeping in pain. 2 down. 11 seconds had passed. The 2 remaining deputies froze entirely. They stared at their fallen comrades in pure shock. The situation had reversed in the blink of an eye. Panic replaced their arrogant confidence. Driven by pure desperation, they attacked simultaneously from the left and the right sides. Larry utilized rapid, calculated footwork. He moved laterally, forcing one deputy to step directly into the path of the other. It was a basic tactical maneuver called stacking. It forced the attackers to crowd each other. The closer deputy thrust his baton forward in a panicked jab. Larry caught the man's thick wrist with his left hand. He twisted the wrist sharply outward, applying immediate and intense pressure to the joint. The deputy yelled out and dropped his baton to relieve the pain. Larry immediately followed with a devastating punch firmly into the man's solar plexus. The deputy folded completely in half. All the air left his lungs in a sharp hiss. He fell to his knees, violently gasping for breath that refused to come. 3 down. 22 seconds had passed. The final deputy swung his baton blindly. Larry blocked the weak strike easily with his forearm. He grabbed the deputy tightly by the collar of his uniform shirt. He stepped in close and swept his right leg forcefully against the man's ankles. The deputy lost his footing instantly. He hit the oily floor with a heavy thud. Larry immediately dropped down beside him. He applied a strict joint lock to the man's right arm, pressing his own knee heavily into the deputy's shoulder blade. He applied pressure until the deputy stopped struggling completely. The man whimpered softly and went entirely limp. 4 down, 45 seconds total. Larry stood up slowly. He released the final man. The warehouse was suddenly very quiet. The only sounds were the loud hum of the ceiling lights and the miserable groans of the 4 large men writhing on the cold floor. Larry had not broken a sweat. His breathing remained deep and perfectly even. He adjusted the collar of his canvas jacket. He had applied the exact amount of force necessary to eliminate the immediate threat. He did not cause any permanent lethal damage. He acted with the supreme discipline of his elite military training. Chief Harris stood completely alone outside the broken circle. His arrogant smile was entirely gone. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly pale white. He stared at his 4 toughest enforcers lying broken on the oily concrete. He stared at the stranger standing entirely untouched in the center of the room. Harris suddenly understood his massive mistake. He had brought a deadly wolf into his own trap. Complete panic consumed his mind. His lucrative extortion scheme was ruined. His men were defeated. His absolute authority in the town was shattered. Harris dropped his fake composure entirely. He reached aggressively toward his right hip. He unsnapped the leather retention strap on his duty holster. He gripped the textured handle of his heavy service pistol. He intended to shoot Larry dead and blamed the entire incident on an aggressive dog attack. Larry saw the dark shift in Harris's eyes. He saw the desperate hand move toward the deadly weapon. He did not hesitate for a single second. Larry closed the 10-foot gap before the heavy gun could clear the leather holster. He moved with terrifying, explosive speed. His left hand clamped down fiercely on the top of the weapon, trapping it securely inside the holster. His right hand gripped Harris directly by the throat. Larry drove his forward momentum straight into the older man's chest. Harris flew backward off his feet. He slammed violently into the cold metal side of a dusty, confiscated car. The heavy impact knocked all the wind completely out of his lungs. Larry ripped the service pistol entirely out of Harris's grip. He stepped back. He pushed the release button and ejected the magazine. He pulled back the slide and caught the chambered round in mid-air. He threw the heavy, useless metal gun across the empty room. It clattered loudly into the shadows. Larry immediately swept Harris's legs out from under him. The police chief fell hard onto the concrete floor. Larry flipped the man over and pinned him face down in the dirty oil stain. He placed his heavy boot firmly between Harris's shoulder blades, applying steady, immovable pressure. He grabbed both of Harris's wrists and twisted them painfully up his back. Harris struggled weakly, his face pressed heavily against the freezing, filthy floor. He gasped desperately for air. Larry stood over him like a solid mountain. The trap was completely dismantled. The violent physical fight was officially over. The heavy silence inside the freezing warehouse did not last long. A new sound pierced the quiet afternoon. It started as a faint wail in the distance. It grew louder and more distinct by the second. It was the sharp, alternating shriek of police sirens. But these sirens did not belong to the Oak Haven Local Department. All of their available vehicles were already parked outside. Flashing blue and red lights painted the dirty, frosted windows of the metal building. Tires locked up and slid across the icy dirt lot outside. Heavy car doors slammed shut in rapid succession. Multiple sets of boots crunched quickly toward the front entrance. Larry kept his heavy boot pressed firmly against Chief Harris's back. He did not move. He listened to the approaching footsteps. He calculated the number of men outside, at least 4. They moved with purpose and discipline. A local resident had seen the entire setup. A passing driver had noticed the out-of-town truck turning down the abandoned dirt road, followed closely by 3 dark police vehicles. The resident knew Chief Harris's brutal reputation. Instead of calling the corrupt local dispatch, the brave citizen dialed the state emergency line and reported a violent ambush in progress. The heavy rusted door of the warehouse kicked open. 4 state troopers flooded into the dark room. They wore crisp, dark blue winter uniforms and wide-brimmed hats. They held their service rifles and sidearms raised and ready. They moved with strict tactical precision, fanning out quickly to secure the immediate area. "State Police!" the lead trooper shouted. His voice boomed through the open space. "Nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" Captain Reynolds led the strike team. Reynolds was a tall, incredibly stern man with sharp gray eyes and decades of law enforcement experience. He swept the barrel of his rifle across the bizarre scene. He saw 4 heavily built local police officers scattered across the oily concrete. One was completely unconscious. One clutched a ruined knee, crying openly. 2 others groaned and held their bruised ribs. And in the center of the room, a stranger in a canvas jacket stood calmly over the local police chief. Harris saw the state troopers. He immediately recognized his only chance at survival. He dropped his tough, arrogant persona entirely. He began to play a desperate, pathetic role. "Help us!" Harris screamed from the floor, his voice cracked with fake terror. "Shoot him! He is completely insane!" Larry slowly removed his boot from Harris's back. He stepped away. He raised both of his hands high into the cold air. He kept his fingers spread wide open to show he held no weapons. "Get on the ground!" Captain Reynolds ordered Larry. He kept his rifle aimed directly at Larry's chest. "Face down. Do it right now." Larry complied immediately. He did not argue. He did not hesitate. He lowered himself smoothly to his knees, then lay flat on his stomach on the freezing concrete. He extended his arms straight out to his sides. "Max, stay," Larry commanded softly. The German shepherd remained sitting perfectly still. He watched the new men with sharp eyes, but he did not move a single muscle. He obeyed his handler despite the chaotic environment. 2 state troopers rushed forward. They grabbed Larry's arms firmly and pulled them behind his back. They snapped heavy metal handcuffs tightly around his wrists. They patted him down quickly, searching for hidden weapons. They found the thick white envelope filled with cash in his jacket pocket, but no firearms. Harris scrambled quickly to his feet. He brushed the thick oil and dirt off his expensive uniform coat. He pointed a trembling finger at Larry. "Thank God you arrived, Captain," Harris gasped loudly. He forced himself to sound breathless and terrified. "We came out here to conduct a routine inventory check on these impounded vehicles. This man followed us. He is a dangerous lunatic. He ambushed my officers without any warning. He used some kind of extreme martial arts. He tried to kill us all." Reynolds kept his rifle lowered but ready. He looked at Harris. Then he looked at the 4 massive local cops groaning on the floor. Finally, he looked down at Larry, who was securely handcuffed. The math simply did not add up in Reynolds's experienced mind. One average-sized stranger had cleanly dismantled 5 large armed police officers. Furthermore, the stranger did not look crazy. He looked entirely disciplined. He had surrendered perfectly the second the troopers entered the room. "Is this true?" Reynolds asked, looking directly down at Larry. Larry turned his head slightly against the cold floor. He looked up at the state police captain. His expression remained totally calm and focused. "No, sir," Larry answered clearly. "They brought me here to extort $700 from me. When I refused to give them my dog as an extra payment, they attacked me with wooden batons. I acted strictly in self-defense." Harris laughed loudly. It sounded incredibly forced and nervous. "Do you hear this garbage? He is a common criminal. He is making up wild stories to cover his unprovoked assault on law enforcement officers. I want him transported to the county jail immediately. I will personally file attempted murder charges against him." Reynolds frowned deeply. It was a classic word-against-word situation. But Harris was a sworn police chief. The law heavily favored his official statement over a random stranger's claim. "Get the suspect on his feet," Reynolds instructed his men. "Secure the injured officers. Call for medical transport." 2 troopers pulled Larry up from the floor. They held him firmly by the elbows. Harris smiled a dark, triumphant smile. The corrupt chief thought he had won. He thought he could bury the stranger in the legal system forever. Larry stood tall despite the tight handcuffs. He looked directly into Captain Reynolds's sharp gray eyes. "Captain," Larry said respectfully, "before you arrest me, I highly recommend you examine my dog." Harris scoffed loudly. "The dog is a vicious stray. My men will seize it and take it to the pound right now." "The dog is a registered military asset," Larry continued calmly, ignoring Harris completely. "Please, Captain, look very closely at his thick canvas collar." Reynolds narrowed his eyes. He signaled his men to hold Larry securely. He walked slowly toward the sitting German shepherd. Max did not growl. The dog simply tilted his head, watching the trooper approach. Reynolds knelt down in front of the dog. He looked closely at the thick military-grade canvas collar wrapped around Max's neck. It looked completely normal at first glance. But as Reynolds inspected the dark fabric, he noticed a tiny, hard black square embedded deep near the heavy metal buckle. A tiny glass lens caught the harsh fluorescent light overhead. It was a highly advanced, ultra-miniature tactical camera, and a tiny green LED light blinked steadily next to it. It was actively recording. Reynolds stood up slowly. He looked at Larry. Then he looked directly at Chief Harris. The corrupt chief's fake smile vanished completely, replaced by pure, undeniable terror. Captain Reynolds stared intensely at the tiny blinking light on the dog collar. He recognized the advanced technology immediately. It was a military-issue body camera specifically adapted for working dogs in hostile environments. It was designed to record high-definition video and crystal-clear audio in complete darkness. Reynolds slowly shifted his gaze from the German shepherd back to Chief Harris. The local police chief looked as if he had seen a ghost. All the color completely drained from his face. His mouth opened to speak, but no words came out. His arrogant posture collapsed. He took a small, trembling step backward. "Get a tactical laptop," Reynolds ordered one of his troopers. "Extract the video data from this device right now. Do not tamper with the original file." A young trooper nodded quickly and ran back out into the freezing dirt lot. He returned a minute later, carrying a rugged, heavy-duty black laptop. He knelt on the oily concrete directly in front of Max. "Good boy," the trooper whispered. Max sat perfectly still. He allowed the trooper to connect a small, specialized data cable from the hidden port on his collar directly into the computer. Reynolds stepped closer to the screen. Harris tried to move toward the door, but 2 troopers immediately blocked his path, resting their hands on their sidearms. The video file opened on the bright computer screen. Reynolds hit the play button. The audio played clearly through the laptop speakers. The footage started with the encounter in the middle of town. The camera angle was slightly low, but it perfectly captured Harris standing on the snowy street. It captured his exact words threatening to take the dog. It recorded the extortion demands flawlessly. Then the trooper skipped the video forward to the warehouse incident. The footage showed Harris demanding the money. It showed him taking the white envelope and dropping the $700 onto the dirty concrete floor. The audio picked up Harris raising the price and demanding the dog as payment. Most importantly, the video showed the precise moment the 4 local officers raised their wooden batons. It showed them stepping forward to brutally attack an unarmed man. Reynolds watched the violent fight unfold in high definition. He saw Larry defend himself with absolute tactical precision. He watched the stranger utilize the exact minimum amount of force required to neutralize multiple armed attackers. He saw Larry disarm Harris and secure the room without causing a single lethal injury. It was a textbook display of extreme military discipline and completely justified self-defense. The footage proved every single word Larry had spoken. The official story Harris tried to invent was completely destroyed. Reynolds closed the laptop with a loud snap. He stood up slowly. He turned his sharp gray eyes back toward Harris. The air in the warehouse felt colder than before. "You are an absolute disgrace to that badge," Reynolds said. His voice was hard and cold as mountain ice. "You run a cheap extortion ring under the cover of a police uniform, and you just attempted to murder a federal military operator." Harris held his hands up in a desperate panic. "Captain, please listen to me. You do not understand how this town works. We have to keep a tight grip on things. We have to maintain order. He is an outsider." "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Reynolds commanded loudly. Harris hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked toward the open side door. He took one sudden step forward, attempting to flee into the dark woods. 2 state troopers tackled him instantly. They drove his heavy body hard into the freezing concrete floor. They pinned his arms forcefully behind his back and snapped heavy steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. Harris cried out in a mixture of physical pain and total humiliation. The King of Oakhaven was finally dethroned. The remaining troopers moved quickly to secure the 4 injured local officers lying on the ground. Paramedics arrived with flashing lights moments later. The medical staff treated the broken knee and the bruised ribs, but the troopers treated the local cops exactly like common criminals. They were handcuffed to their stretchers and read their rights out loud. Reynolds walked slowly over to Larry. He pulled a small silver key from his uniform pocket. He unlocked the tight metal handcuffs and removed them from Larry's wrists. Larry rubbed his arms slowly, restoring the blood flow. "I apologize for the rough treatment earlier," Reynolds said respectfully. He extended his right hand. Larry shook the captain's hand with a firm grip. "You were doing your job exactly right. I understand the protocol. Your commanding officer at the naval base will receive a full, detailed report of this incident by morning," Reynolds stated. "But my official report will state clearly that you acted entirely in self-defense. You prevented a major organized crime operation. You have absolutely no legal flags in this state. You are free to go." "Thank you, Captain," Larry replied smoothly. "What specific unit are you with?" Reynolds asked quietly, noting the incredible combat skills he had just witnessed on the video. "I cannot say, sir," Larry answered. His face remained perfectly neutral. Reynolds nodded slowly. He understood the silent rules of the Tier 1 community. "Go finish your family business. Oakhaven is safe now. The state police will handle the cleanup and the federal charges here." Larry whistled one sharp note. Max stood up immediately and trotted over to his left leg. They walked together out of the dark, cold warehouse. The freezing winter air felt clean and sharp in Larry's lungs. The flashing blue and red police lights illuminated the dark pine trees, signaling the end of a long nightmare for the small town. Larry opened the door of his rusty Ford pickup truck. Max jumped happily into the passenger seat. Larry drove back to his father's isolated cabin. He spent the next 3 days packing the rest of the personal belongings. He found his father's old fishing gear and packed it carefully into a wooden crate. He hired a local contractor to quickly fix the broken front door. He cleaned the floors and locked the windows. On his final afternoon, Larry met with Mr. Finney, the town lawyer, to finalize the property sale. Finney looked like a completely different man. He stood tall and smiled warmly as Larry entered the office. The constant nervous tremor in his hands was entirely gone. The news of Harris's arrest had spread through Oakhaven like wildfire. The heavy shadow of fear that choked the town for years was completely lifted. The citizens walked the streets with their heads held high again. "You did this town a massive favor, Larry," Finney said as he handed over the final estate check. "We finally have our home back. Thank you." "Just take care of the place," Larry said quietly. On the fourth morning, Larry loaded the final boxes into the back of his truck. The heavy blizzard had passed. The sun shone brightly against the pristine white snow. The sky was a clear, piercing blue. Larry stood on the front wooden porch and looked at the old cabin one last time. He felt a deep sense of peace and closure. His father could finally rest quietly. Larry climbed into the driver's seat. He started the cold engine. He looked over at Max. The German shepherd looked back, his amber eyes bright and alert, ready for the next mission. "Let us go home, buddy," Larry said. He drove the truck slowly down the winding mountain road. He passed the weathered town limits sign. He left Oakhaven behind in the rearview mirror. He drove east toward the naval base in Virginia. He had a classified deployment waiting for him. He had an elite team relying on his absolute focus. He had faced the worst kind of petty corruption and kept his strict discipline completely intact. The cold return was finally over. His true mission was just beginning. That is the story of Larry and Max. True strength is not about how loudly you can yell or how quickly you resort to violence. True strength is having the power to completely destroy your enemies, but choosing the path of extreme discipline and restraint instead. Larry could have easily hurt those corrupt officers on the very first day, but he waited. He protected his loyal dog. He protected his critical mission, and ultimately he let the pure truth shine. I share this story because we live in a world where arrogant people often abuse their small amount of power against the innocent. But justice always finds a way to step into the light. May God bless you and your family with the quiet strength to stay calm in the face of any adversity and the courage to always protect those who cannot protect themselves. If you believe that true justice always prevails in the end, please comment Amen down below. If this story resonated with your heart, please share it with a friend, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories just like this one.